Are you ready?
Ready to roll. Yep.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Prove It First Reintroduction press conference. I am honored to be here today. My name is Scott Beauchamp. I'm the policy director for the Friends of the Boundary Waters. Today, we're going to be saying a few words about a bill that we think needs to become the law of the land in Minnesota, and that is Prove It First. This is a bill meant to protect Minnesota's clean water and has been supported by over 64 members of the Minnesota legislature. Here to say a few more words about the bill is the executive director of the Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness, Chris Knopp.
All right. Thank you, Scott. Good morning, everyone. As Scott mentioned, I'm Chris Knopp, the executive director of Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness. And at the Friends, we're about three things: wilderness, people, and community. And our bill, the Prove It First bill that we're working on collectively, hits on all those three themes. And today we are here because of this. We are here because of clean water. And Minnesota seems to have an abundance of clean water. We are the land of 10,000 lakes, of sky blue water. We're on the shores of the greatest of the Great Lakes, Lake Superior, that holds 10% of the world's surface fresh water. And yet we are squandering this most critical of natural resources. 56% of our lakes and streams are categorized as impaired by our state officials. This past year, over 300 more lakes and streams were added to that list of impaired waters. The Prove It First law puts clean water first, puts human health first, and the communities that are downstream from proposed copper-sulfide mines first. Copper-sulfide mining has never been done safely before, has never been done before in Minnesota. It is much different than iron mining. Copper-sulfide mining has a perfect record of pollution. Copper-sulfide mining is a threat to our clean water. Copper-sulfide mining is not part of our heritage. Clean water is part of our heritage. The Prove It First bill is simple. Before a copper-sulfide mine could open in Minnesota, the company that wants to open that mine must show that at least one mine somewhere in the country has been opened for at least 10 years and closed for 10 years without causing pollution. Simply put, Minnesota should not be a guinea pig for this type of mining. The US EPA has identified this as America's most polluting industry. I'm proud today to be introduced by legislators in the Minnesota legislature that are the primary authors of this. I'm going to introduce right now Jen McKeen, the senator from Duluth, who is one of the primary sponsors of the bill in the Senate. Senator McKeen, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Hello, I'm State Senator Jen McKeen. I represent Duluth in the Minnesota State Senate, and it is my great honor and pleasure to be here today to talk about the Prove It First legislation that we have authored and are introducing into the state legislature, and our celebration again of this legislation and the promise that it holds for our communities. So I will just tell you a little bit about where we're coming from living in Duluth, downstream from one of the proposed copper sulfide mines, the Polymet Glencore proposal that has been brought forward. So in our community of Duluth, when this proposal came forward, we heard a lot of cheerleading from industry about how this was going to be a boon for our economy. We heard a lot of claims that people started raising questions about. And at the time, I myself wasn't actually very involved in politics. I'm an attorney and I was practicing in my practice, but I knew and heard from really learned, smart people, community members, teachers, professors, scientists in our community of Duluth who are raising the question of saying, this seems like a really bad idea. This type of mining in particular is not like the mining that we have been used to. It is not like iron mining. It's different. It has a terrible record around the world. And as Chris said, it has a perfect record of pollution. So it really posed a really scary danger to our community. And people started raising questions, and we started asking for some of these answers to the questions that we had about what this would mean for our community, both for our clean water, because as Chris said, is about our clean water. And in Duluth, we drink this water. And our entire economy and our identity as Duluthians and in the downstream communities is based on living on this magnificent body of clean water, Lake Superior, and in that watershed that holds so much of the world's fresh water and is just the cornerstone of who we are in Duluth. So we raised those questions and we've been asking for answers. And unfortunately, the way that our laws are structured right now, it has allowed industry and it has allowed certain people in power not to give us those answers, but to just bulldoze these projects through. So what we have here is the Prove It First bill. And what it does is, Chris described it so well, is it does exactly what the title says. It asks the people making these claims to prove it first. Show us the evidence, show us that you could do this safely before you use our communities as an experiment for your profit making. So it's a real common sense, pragmatic piece of legislation. We'd really like to see it garner some bipartisan support because we all care about clean water. We all care about our economies and having flourishing, thriving communities going into the future. So it is my great pleasure to be the lead author in the Senate of this bill. We have so many co-authors of the bill and so much support for it. So it's just wonderful to be able to celebrate this bill with everybody today. And now with that, I will introduce my colleague, Representative Kelly Morrison. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKeen. Good morning. Thank you for being here. As we begin a new legislative session, we think it's imperative that we continue the conversation about clean water in Minnesota. So we want to take this opportunity to reintroduce the Prove It First legislation. I'm State Representative Kelly Morrison, and I represent a district that includes most of Lake Minnetonka, one of the most loved lakes in Minnesota. So clean water is important to my constituents. But I think it's fair to say there's a growing recognition across our state that we must be more vigilant in protecting our most precious natural resource. I'm a state representative, but I'm also a practicing physician. And I ran for office because I wanted to be a voice for science and evidence-based policymaking in the legislature. And as the only physician in the Minnesota House, I think it's my obligation to speak up on issues of public health and well-being. And the science around copper-sulfide mining is clear. We know that copper-sulfide mining is risky. It's never been done without causing pollution. In fact, our own EPA calls it the most toxic industry in America. And this kind of mining has never been done in Minnesota before. Our permitting laws are simply not written to reflect the true risks of copper-sulfide mining. And those risks are numerous. But the risks to human health are significant and potentially devastating. The process can leach heavy metals like lead, mercury, and arsenic into the water and release mercury emissions into the air. The risks to fish and aquatic life and to pregnant women and infants of exposure to these heavy metals are well known and can be life-altering. In spite of these threats to public health, and in spite of calls by our local and state public health leaders and organizations, no health impact study was ever performed before the PolyMet permits were approved. If we let the PolyMet project proceed as is, we risk the health and well-being of downstream communities, and we risk setting a precedent that will allow this kind of mining to proceed all over northeastern Minnesota, with potentially devastating consequences for human health, the environment, and our economy, as Minnesota taxpayers will be on the hook to pay up for the inevitable cleanup. The Prove It First legislation is pretty simple. It just asks industry to prove that it can mine without polluting for 10 years and then close a mine for 10 years without polluting. These companies make big promises, so let's hold them to those. We're simply asking them to prove that they can do this kind of mining without polluting Minnesota's water. Everyone in Minnesota deserves both clean water and appropriate protections from foreign mining companies that have no incentive to protect Minnesota's land, water, or people. Before we allow the world's most toxic industry to operate next to some of the world's cleanest water, let's simply ask them to prove it first. Thank you. Senator Steve Swedzinski. Sorry,
Yeah, no, thank you, Representative Morrison. I appreciate that. I'm Steve Swedzinski, and I'm senator from Eden Prairie, and I first fell in love with this place back in 1979. The first time I stepped foot in that beautiful million-acre piece of real estate, I fell in love. In fact, I fell in love a few years later with my girlfriend when I took her up there. I got 4 quick things to say. My 2 colleagues have spoken eloquently already about the costs and perils and trials of copper nickel mining, but I have 4 things I just want to add. Number 1, there's a balancing act we as legislators have to balance all the time, and it's between economic development and preservation of our environment. It's not a responsibility we take lightly. That balance is something we are enshrined to try to figure out. When is economic development trump environmental protection, and when does environmental protection trump environmental development? And I think in this case, the answer is easy. 2/3 of Minnesotans want us to preserve the boundary waters, while less than 20% of Minnesotans want copper nickel sulfide mining. And there's about 20% that are a little bit unsure. And I would challenge that 20% that are a little bit unsure to take a little canoe ride in and go to where these mines are going to take place and paddle or hike in this beautiful environment, so you get a handle, and you 20% will come away going, okay, how can I sign up? We got to preserve this national treasure. The second thing I want to talk about is the spirit of the boundary waters. The spirit of the boundary waters, to me, it's already a national treasure. We don't need the treasures beneath the earth when we're looking at treasures above the on the ground, in the trees, and the air, and the wildlife. And it's already a gold mine in that respect. And it's our crown jewel, if you will. Philosophers have been talking for thousands of years about wilderness, about nature. They haven't been talking about development for those times as something the human soul needs. It's a national treasure. And just like all national treasures, I don't want to live in a world where we disregard those national treasures. If anyone ever discovered copper nickel deposits underneath Gettysburg, would we even be having this conversation? If somebody discovered copper nickel deposits outside Old Faithful or the Grand Canyon or Fort Sumter or Arlington National Cemetery, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because those places are enshrined in our soul, just like these million acres are. And fourthly, the philosophy of the boundary waters. First time I was ever up there, I found out about leave no trace. Leave no trace. It's embedded in you. Everywhere you go, leave no trace, leave no trace. Take only photographs, leave only footprints. That's something I hold dear to my heart. Leave no trace. As legislators, one of our responsibilities is to somehow, in our own unique and precious way, to leave this world a little bit better than we found it. To leave it better than we found it, not worse. And lastly, prove it first. I can remember being a little kid and my mom saying, is your room clean? Prove it first before you can go play with Stevie. Is you got your hat on? You got your long johns on? Let me see. And my mom was a pretty reasonable person, because she realized if I want to go out and play, I have to prove it first that I've done my responsibility and my due diligence. So all we're asking is to prove it first. Thank you.
Thank you, Senators and Representative Morrison here. You can see the spirit of the wilderness, human health, and communities are all affected by these proposed copper sulfide mines. And prove it first is common sense legislation. Minnesota shouldn't be a guinea pig for this type of mining that is, as they said, the most toxic industry in our United States. So we're excited at this, now 7 days into the legislative session to advance Prove It First that has widespread support in the Minnesota House and the Minnesota Senate and among the citizens of Minnesota. So thank you everyone for being here. If there are questions, we'll answer them, or we'll answer them after this after this press conference. So thank you so much. Again, we're Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness, and we're privileged to be able to protect our most precious resource, our clean water. Thank you.